So I love to come to conferences like this and do a presentation, but I also like to attend earlier sessions so that I can have a feel for the audience and everything. And so in the opening remarks that were made, I thought there were, 3 points about, what's different. And so I belong to a golf association group called the Sanctuary. And for those of you that might be familiar with it, it's on Sanibel Island. And Sanibel Island, for many of you, you've probably seen lots of scenes, lots of pictures of that, because Hurricane Ian hit it directly on. So it's been a rather interesting 3 or 4 months. My wife and I couldn't actually get back on the island except for a boat trip for about 3 months, but we eventually got back. But what is different about the Sanctuary is, one, it's on an island, which makes it a pretty unique golf course. Second, it's entirely surrounded by a wildlife preserve. So I know some of you were talking about a golf course where people are hitting balls and they're hitting a house. Well, that ain't gonna happen there. It's a wildlife preserve. But third, it's again a play on the reversal, and we heard a gentleman speaking today about reversing. And the phrase, "don't feed the wildlife," is really important, because there are signs that says, do not go off the golf course to chase your ball in the woods or in the ponds. Because on Sanibel, we have alligators, we have coyotes, and we have bobcats. So please, don't get off the golf course and try to chase your ball, because you may not be coming back. And yeah, there are people who have ignored the signs, and they've had some interesting bites. So again, it's kind of fascinating. Also, I love the music that was played. It's just great. But in the intro to Michael earlier today, the lead-in song was from the Rolling Stones, and it was basically "Start Me Up." And many of you may not know this, but that song was actually cut off at the end because of the lyrics. They played at the Super Bowl, and if you go back a number of years, some of you may realize they actually cut off the lyrics in that song. So while the Rolling Stones were still singing, there was no audio at the Super Bowl midtime show. So I thought that was rather fascinating. We talk about the wardrobe malfunction, but this was actually a bit of censoring far before that period ever showed up. So we deal with economics, and what we're going to talk about a little bit today is the big picture, macroeconomics, and a little bit about the microeconomics in terms of the actual costs and operation. And Jay, I will say I would love to see some of that data that you're trying to collect from the members, because it's really going to tell us a lot about the cost of operating an operation. So I think the most important thing for many of you when you're looking at the news or hearing the story is that people are really talking about slow economic growth in 2023. A lot of folks are talking about recessions. This morning on CNBC, Steve Leisman was mentioning that he had never seen a year where every single quarter in their GDP economic outlook was below 1%. So this is a downshift. Last year, again, very strong, 3-4% growth. I think at this point is probably the best number. But now you're talking a big slowdown. So slow growth and persistent inflation, very tough combination for us. We're talking about still inflation numbers of 4 or 5%. CPI, the Consumer Price Index, might be a little higher. And then you also have the additional challenge of rising unit labor costs. And what we talk about is not wages. We don't really worry about wages. What we want to know is the cost of labor adjusted for productivity. And what you're seeing in the United States is, again, rising unit labor costs. That's a very different challenge. For many of us, the top line revenue may be slower, but the bottom line costs are rising. That's definitely a profit squeeze. And for those of you that are looking at the financial news in the last 2 or 3 weeks, you know very much that a lot of companies are reporting earnings less than what people had expected. And especially for those of you familiar with the tech sector, you know the layoffs that hit a lot of top-line companies. One point of interest, you don't need to take any photographs. All these slides are publicly available to you. Just contact your person at the organization and feel free to use these slides as best as possible. I oftentimes say, in my presentations, take 2 or 3 slides, sit down with your senior management, and talk about them. Now, you're not going to do all 25, 50, or 100 slides, but you are going to take away 2 or 3 and talk about the fundamentals that are really key. Our problem, of course, is that if we have persistent inflation, the Fed is going to raise interest rates again. And on February 1st, the market expectation is now about 25 basis points. There is a lot of sentiment for doing 50 basis points. But basically, if you have to borrow money, it's more than likely that the cost of financing is going to be up over the next 6 months to a year relative to what it is today. So the challenge, I think, for many of you is slower economic growth, so slower top-line revenue, rising labor costs, and you'll certainly see that in a minute. And again, the sentiment that this will be a very challenging year relative to last year. We, of course, will find out a year from now how challenging, but I think it's all a significant part. Now, what do we look at? Oftentimes, I will tell audiences, okay, fine, you went to a conference, you listened to someone like me talk about the economy. How do I track what's going on during the year? Well, how does my chief financial officer track what's going on during the year, other than listening to network news? But here are 5 leading economic indicators. And as you can imagine, again, growing up in New England, playing hockey, Wayne Gretzky was, a hockey player of somewhat fame. And his story is something I tell all the audiences that I speak to. Watch where the puck is going. I don't care where the puck is now. I want to know where it's going. Tell me about the leading indicators in the economy. I don't care about industrial production. I don't care about retail sales. I don't care about the number of jobs created last month. What I care about is first jobless claims. Are they going up or down? And surprisingly, they've actually been going down over the last month. That's a very, very positive signal. Less people are claiming unemployment insurance. Second, ISM manufacturing has definitely slowed down orders and shipments. But the most important part of the ISM manufacturing numbers is that prices paid have declined sharply. What that means basically is people in the manufacturing process, when they're buying their goods, they're buying something a lot less expensive than they paid 2 months, 3 months, or 4 months ago. So what that means is that inflation is definitely coming down. Factory orders are very strong. Now, you wouldn't think there would be so many recession forecasts with the argument that factory orders are pretty solid. But what is happening is what you suspect is happening. Capital is being substituted for labor. Companies have talked about the shortage of workers, how difficult it is to get workers, and what you're seeing is companies are substituting capital equipment for workers. Anyone familiar with the fast food industry knows that is very much what's going on. For some of you that have gone to restaurants, you can actually, again, as you saw yesterday, you take a monitor, you look at a screen, you order from the screen, you don't even have an order taker come to your table. So again, it's kind of a fascinating process. Building permits, that is probably the one industry that is most hit, is housing. So if you want to see real challenges in terms of the economy, it is in fact the housing industry. And then finally, consumer confidence. And what has surprised, I think, a lot of people is consumer confidence has now turned around. It really has improved. And when you look at the bottom line in the US economy, consumers are getting more jobs. Their wages are up, consumer confidence is up. And so what's happening is the consumer, which many of you are pretty familiar with, is 2/3 of the US economy, actually is providing that support for the overall economy going forward. So that's pretty interesting news. As the gentleman talked earlier, and I think it's fascinating when you look at your organization, how the wealth aspect, the value of the equity and bond market holdings are to your organization. The equity market, as you know, is a leading economic indicator. So it's always challenging because the stock market leads the economy. The economy doesn't lead the stock market. And so what you're seeing is a little bit of a relief that the stock market has actually improved a little bit before the economy. For those of you that went through 2020, it was fascinating how rapidly the economy just shut down. But it was interesting that by March and April, before the economy recovered in the third quarter, the equity market was already up. So the equity market leads the economy, and it looks like that is providing some basis for us to be optimistic in terms of the overall economy. A couple of other things, quality spreads remain remarkably low. So what does all that mean? It means slower economic growth, persistent inflation, slightly higher interest rates, and that combination will be very challenging to this organization in the year ahead. There's no doubt about it. This is probably going to be the most challenging year of the next 3 to 5 years for your organization, because it is going to be, how do I get the revenue? How do I control my costs? And if I have to do some financing, at what rate am I financing your business? So again, this is not happiness and joy and running around forever. This is not 2019. This is 2023, and probably one of the more difficult years in managing your organization. But this is where the management aspect, the financial controls really come to bear. So this is the demand side of the Gulf experience, real personal income and consumer sentiment, and you can see what the challenge is. That real disposable income, what people have after taxes, has gone down pretty sharply. But this is also kind of interesting. It was commented earlier about recessions, and the blue bar areas are the recession areas. And what you'll notice when you look at the graph carefully, only once in all that period since 1982 has people's spending on recreation actually turned negative. People will spend the money. And they find just different ways of doing it. And so when people talk about a recession, generally what you're thinking and what you should be thinking is spending on recreation will not be as weak as it is for the overall economy. And that is pretty darn good news. And that may surprise some of you. But people will spend the money on recreation. You just have to make a value proposition that they want to spend it with you rather than anything else. But again, we'll see a couple of more illustrations later. This is your wealth effect. So again, when you were talking earlier about other income and the impact on your portfolio and the wealth of the organization, this is the New York Stock Exchange. You can see how dramatically it declines in recession periods, again, the blue bars. And you can see also how dramatically it declined as the Fed continued to raise rates in the last year. And when you think about it, you kind of remember that every time the Fed raised rates, people said, oh, we're surprised the Fed did 75 basis points. Next time we think they're going to do 50. Then they did 75. Oh, they'll do 50 next time. They did 75. And they'll do 50 next time. They did 75. So it was constantly the market was being surprised. And as many of you know, the stock market is a discounting mechanism. It discounts what it expects in the future. And if it kept on getting higher interest rates, well, that was a negative. So there's an interesting dynamic going on there. And so what we'll see is gradually this graph has now bottomed out and has improved a little bit. So again, when you're looking at that other income a year from now, what you may actually see is that other income is actually positive and adding to your balance sheet. So here's price inflation. This is goods and services. You are in the service industry. That's what you folks do. And you can see the significant inflation that goes on in terms of both goods and services. Now, the nice thing to note is in the last month or so, these numbers have started to turn down. So you may have seen the worst of the inflation in terms of the goods that you buy or the services that you pay, except in one area, which we'll go over later. But it may be that the worst of the inflation numbers are behind us and they're gradually coming down. This is the consumer price index for recreation. And again, it's fascinating how out of bounds the last year has been in terms of what consumers are paying for their recreational dollars. Very expensive, but you have to figure out, is this an aberration, or are we going to return, or are we returning to pre-2019? The suspicion is this is pretty much an aberration. But you're looking at this and figuring out my average inflation rate on recreation is about 2% on average. This is, again, a significant challenge to many of you. This is the employment cost index for leisure and hospitality workers. So this is your labor force. The employment cost index is not only what you're paying them in wages, but also in benefits. There was a discussion earlier today about benefits and incentives. And the employment cost index covers both what you're paying in wages and what you're paying in benefits. And you can see, indeed, labor had become exceedingly expensive on a year-over-year basis. And so it's now moderated a little bit, but it's still fairly expensive. This is the real problem for many of us. Certainly is the problem at sanctuary, construction. I mean, again, for us on Sanibel, Captiva, Fort Myers, I mean, you simply can't get the people. That's it. You've got 300, 400 houses that have been either totally destroyed or significantly damaged. There's no way that you can get the workers to deal with each house separately. My wife and I, we live on a street where there are 12 homes, and we are the only home that is totally occupied 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have 4 other homes that are totally destroyed. I don't know if you know, FEMA has a rule that if the house is more than 50% destroyed, you have to knock it down. So we got 4 homes that are totally out, but we've got a lot of homes that simply are not occupied right now. People will come and work, but only about 2 or 3 other homes are actually being worked on. Again, it shows you the advantage that we had worked with a particular contractor to finish our house, to do the landscaping, to do a lot of remodeling. And when it came time to rebuild, we went right back to that person, and that person said, yeah, I'll be there tomorrow. So there's a little bit of friendship there, community activity going on. But you can see the costs in construction. I mean, it is amazing to see still now the number of workers and construction workers still going on in the greater Fort Myers area. in terms of what's happening. So here's your food and beverage costs. Again, perhaps, significant outbreak in terms of where this is going, what's happening with this. Food and beverage, again, very, very expensive. So it's part of your calculus. So I think what you can anticipate is, except for construction costs, employee costs and food and beverage costs are probably going to moderate over the next 3 to 6 months. And for those of you that are interested, I will update these graphs and give them to Taylor in another 3 months so you can get a sense of what might be turning around in the overall economy. So making it work. One conversation I had with a fellow earlier, talking about branding. Absolutely, you need to have a brand. You need to have a sense that people identify with your club in a very, very specific way. We love this club because of A. So, what is your brand? What is it that makes your club truly unique? Now, for the sanctuary, okay, it's on an island, okay? And not a lot of people can get there. But when you look at our club, you do have a sense that, yes, it's on an island. Yes, it's a very nice place and everything. But when you're playing that course, you're not seeing anything but wildlife and trees and swamps and everything else. You're not seeing other houses. You're not seeing boats. And you're not seeing other players, because they really do limit how many people can play on that course at a certain time. Setting prices, and this came up earlier in another discussion. The Andrew Carnegie rule was, you want to set the prices so the mill constantly runs. Okay, I'm sure some of you have been in the manufacturing business. You can't stop the can processor. You can't stop the bottle washer, the bottle filling process. You can't stop the auto production. It's one after another. And so what Andrew Carnegie simply said is, I have a facility. I have a golf course. He didn't say golf course, but he had a facility. And he had to figure out, like a hotel, it's a fixed asset. It's there. It's available. All right, for some of you, 8 to 10 hours a day maybe. If someone's not using it, that's wasted money. And so for Andrew Carnegie, what he said, I will set a price to make sure someone's using that golf course the 6 to 8 hours a day. If I have, and again, it was mentioned earlier, if I have to discount the afternoon from 4 p.m. on, that's fine. I can do that. But I can get that revenue continuing being used all the time. The other interesting comment earlier was someone said, well, you could have a driving range and you can play music. You can't do that. You can't play music in a national wildlife preserve. No, the Forest Service will not let you do that. So on beyond golf, social interactions, they are very important at the sanctuary. Again, you can have the traditional mahjong, you can have the traditional book club and everything else, but there are a lot of social actions all the time. We have, a lot of cotillion dances. We have a lot of informal commentary coming through. Food and wine events. So yes, we get some people coming in from Italy. We were very lucky. In our region, we have a very, very successful distributor of Italian wines. And once a year, they will come in and do the wine and cheese event. We've somebody that knows somebody from Napa, California. They will come in. Our club is a little bit unusual, perhaps for some of you. We have members from literally 40 out of the 50 states and 5 different countries. So when we need to pull strings to get somebody to come in and do something, we can sort of get them to do that. We have speakers on relevant topics. as you know, again, like me, I speak, okay? The nature of our club is it has traditionally been retirees, but it is moving to be younger people. But also, when you think about it, the main focus of our group, unlike perhaps some of you, the main focus of our group is investments, financial investments. These are people that have been in the finance industry, the banking industry, and some of them have significant amounts of money. And so for some of you, it may be agriculture, it may be forestry, it may be manufacturing, but try to think up, again, relevant topics. And like our club, you can pull in the members to talk about it. All right? We've got one fellow from Houston. I mentioned it to a friend earlier. I mean, you want to talk about the energy industry? He still has 2 companies in Houston doing energy. You want to talk about the price of oil, the price of gasoline? He can talk about it. And so for us, we benefit a lot from that kind of free speaker, all right, who comes in and talks about whatever their business is that's actually very relevant to the membership. So, you know, we benefit tremendously from that. We have cotillions, again, dress-up dancing. A lot of our membership, as you can imagine, comes down just for the winter. So from January to April, we have a full house, absolutely. But we have a lot of people who love to put on the ladies love their winter dresses, the men love their tuxedos. And so that's what we do. And we have 3 or 4 of these cotillions where people are dancing to music and everything else. Not as good at the music as we get here, but we get that music. Again, traditionally, like many of you probably have, we have women's luncheons that are not limited to women, but we have women's luncheons, and that's what the audience is aimed at. And sorry to disappoint you, but it's not all fashion. You'd be surprised. A lot of these women run their own portfolios. So the women do finance luncheons, okay, investment luncheons, et cetera, et cetera. We have luncheons that focus simply on charitable events, and I certainly agree with the comment earlier. Believe me, the women have their own money, so they can do what they want. And then finally, you know, our club has been around a while, but you can almost figure out the demographics that have happened. We have 2 bocce ball areas you can play, and bocce ball is incredibly competitive. And I mean, we have leagues, and the league teams are all sold out, and that's it. And in fact, my wife and I are still on the waiting list for playing bocce ball, even though I did play bocce ball in the north end of Boston, but it wasn't good enough for these folks. We have a wonderful gym. It is very busy. We have paddleball, tennis, pickleball. We have a whole bunch of different stuff that is rather interesting in terms of what. But a couple of things I thought were really interesting. Disney offered escape at a moment when America had much to escape from. When you read, and that's from Walt, and what he was basically saying is, I am not here to preach to you. I am here to offer entertainment. Some of you may realize that Disney was very much criticized for doing all these cartoons and all these movies and Fantasia. And many of you know Fantasia was heavily criticized and did not do well initially at the box office. But basically, we're not here to save the world, right? You're here primarily to offer golf as a recreation. And as some of the people mentioned earlier, it is a form of escape. I am here, I am playing golf, I'm having a good time, and I am not here to save the world for democracy. So again, it's kind of important to appreciate why your customer, client, member is there. It's again, that feeling. So it is not our job to teach, implant morals, or improve anything beyond our pitches. That was Walt Disney. All right, you get the golf course right, you get the entertainment right, you get the members. If you're going to sit there and preach, that doesn't work. And again, J.P. Morgan, great, obviously, great quote. The man who was a bear in the future of the United States will always go broke. I mean, when you look at some of these graphs, you realize, in general, the trend is always up, the New York Stock Exchange. And then finally, and we can turn it over to questions that you might have, another thing is recreation spending is less volatile in the overall economy. The graph's a little bit compressed because of 2019, 2020. But if you look at personal spending on recreation, since 2002, when we have reliable data, because the federal government changes the way they calculate the data, up until 2019, 2020, there was no period where recreational spending by people in the United States was negative in terms of economic growth. At no time was it negative. And you look at a year like 2007, 2009, that was mentioned earlier today, yeah, the economy fell into a recession, but people's spending on recreation did not decline. So again, it's kind of fascinating. And if, again, you look at the graph carefully, you'll see that the recovery in recreation spending was stronger than the overall economy and still remains stronger than the overall economy. So I will simply end there and say to you, I will update these graphs. I will send them to Taylor. If you want an update of the graphs, please contact Taylor. All these data are publicly available, so there's no secret sort of information here. I worked in the financial services business for about 40 plus years, and it was always fascinating to me that some organization would come and tell us about some product that they have, and it was always a black box. And you couldn't figure out, where are these numbers coming from? And how is this calculated? And he just said, nah, I can't do that. I can't do the black box thing. So questions, comments, feel free to ask, and we could talk a little bit about economics, and don't be embarrassed to ask questions. I mean, since most of you are already the boss, you don't have to worry about your boss listening to your question. Yes, sir? Do you
have any thoughts on where energy prices are going?
Any thoughts on where? Energy price. So the gentleman's question on energy prices. And yes, I thought about putting that graph in there, but the volatility kind of messed up the graph. I would say on average, you can probably expect that gas prices will not decline as much as the overall price index will decline. So depending upon what again, I don't know to what extent you have exemptions, but state and local sales taxes have a huge impact on gasoline prices. So for us, we're paying anywhere between $3.25 and $3.40 on a gallon of gasoline in our area. In Florida, I know it's kind of funny when you think about it, each county assesses its own gasoline tax. So if you ever have a chance to drive around here, or if you're going from Jacksonville to Orlando, or Orlando to Tampa, or Orlando to Miami, if you have to, you find that the price of the gasoline varies not so much because of the distribution cost, but because of the sales tax in each county. And you can actually get the listing and find out if I leave Orlando here and I drive back to Fort Myers and I go through Polk County, that's where I want to get my gas. It's Polk County. So it's kind of an interesting lesson. But I would say I would not, in your business, plan on saving money by gasoline prices coming down over the next year. I would say it's probably going to be perhaps construction costs, perhaps material costs will save you some money. Depending upon how you're working with your employees, it's probably going to be a matter of keeping those people for a longer period of time, and offering them, again, again, it was an interesting comment earlier on benefits, et cetera. 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday, any employee can play the driving range for free. Just go out there and do that. You can go ahead and have a good time. And our employees are adults. Wine and cheese. Free wine, free cheese. Go on the driving range, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's yours, 4 to 6. And you just go over and have a good time for yourself. So that's, an additional, I guess, benefit, if you can say, overall. And there was another gentleman over here with his hand up. No? Okay, sir, please.
Supply chain shortage. What do you see the future for that? Are we having issues with equipment every time we go to order something and say there's a shortage?
Yep. So the gentleman's question on supply chain shortages. They are easing. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York has an index that's publicly available on supply chains in general. What you saw with the ISM manufacturing survey, they have a supplier delivery index that also shows some easing. Now, depending upon what particular product you're looking at, you can look at the industrial production numbers or you can look at some of the detail. The ISM manufacturing survey has a lot of detail by industry. So they will actually list for you what goods or commodities are in short supply. And they have an extensive list of about 30 items. So again, you could contact Taylor, and Taylor will ask me, and I'll send Taylor the latest ISM manufacturing survey numbers, and you can look for what's in short supply. It does appear that the supply shortages are moderating for most products. But again, in some areas, they're still pretty short. But if you contact Taylor and let him know, I'll send Taylor the ISM manufacturing number, and he can take a look at it. But that ISM manufacturing number comes out every month. So one of the great challenges you all going to have is that a lot of these numbers are monthly numbers. They change month to month. So you should have, in general, somebody in your community who probably tracks this. Oftentimes, I think many of you may have a financial brokerage arrangement with some firm. They have access to incredible numbers, and they can update you on all these numbers anytime. But I would suspect, looking at the producer price index, the prices on commodities are coming down pretty quickly. So it'll probably be an advantage there. Yes, any other questions, comments? You're going to stuck here for another 10 minutes, so you ain't going anywhere. So you might as well ask a question. Yes, sir.
Do you feel that what we've seen happen, this is your personal opinion, I'm asking, not a numbers thing, that our increase was because of the influx of cash and now it's kind of went away and that's caused what's happened?
So the gentleman's question is kind of very important. So the gentleman's question is about the influx, and I'll assume it's federal subsidies you're talking about. If your demographic is people and households between 40 and 100,000, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. That demographic between 40 and 100,000 got a lot of federal subsidy money. As that subsidy money dwindles away in 2023, they're going to have less discretionary income to spend. So if that's your demographic, that's more of a challenge. Now, once you get above that, you're probably dealing with a lot of people who have had fairly steady jobs, good income, and now will benefit if the stock market starts to recover. So if your demographic is 110 to 150,000 a year, they're probably going to be on the upside now in terms of what's going on. And that's what makes so much of this so challenging. When you're in Southwest Florida like we are, one of our great challenges is in-migration. We just get more people. Our club it has a limit in terms of the number of people. We have a waiting list, and good luck. because it's full, and that's the way it's going to be. So, you know, but I'm sure some of you come from areas that are losing population. You know, again, you know, there are states that consistently lose population. Illinois is one. As big as Illinois is, it continues to lose population. So the demographic flow of people is pretty significant. So depending on what your demographic is, and you probably should be able to figure that out. Census data is very, very good. You can calculate from census the basic population by county in the United States, and they have some rough estimates of income by county. So you can get some pretty good information in terms of your region overall. For us, it's been really difficult because we just got so many people coming in. I mean, if you drove I-75 down from Tampa to Naples 10 years ago, you wouldn't even recognize the road today. I mean, it's just totally overwhelmed with, well, even worse with Hurricane Ian, totally overwhelmed with trucks and deliveries and everything. I mean, it's always funny because we live in an island, so everything has to be delivered. So it's not a question of you can come over and pick something up. No, everything has to be delivered. So we have Amazon and UPS and FedEx deliveries every day on all the basic stuff because there ain't anywhere else you're going to get it, especially in the last 3 to 4 months. So another question back there. Oh, yes, sir, please.
Should I buy a car or should I wait?
Okay. I would say right now, sir, I would wait, depending upon what you want to buy. Generally, I don't think the price of gasoline makes any difference, but I think there is a significant amount of revaluation going on with hybrids and electric vehicles. Hybrids, not so much, but it is a little negative. Electric vehicles, a lot of question marks with respect to that. But again, depending upon what you want to buy, yeah, I mean, if you came down to my area and you wanted an SUV, you can't get one. Because everybody that had a small sedan, they're gone. Because people quickly learned, I need to load up the truck, literally, all right, at Target or whatever it is, at Home Depot or Lowe's, and I got to bring it all with me. Because that sedan ain't going to work anymore, and besides, that sedan is totally wiped out. We have a number of homes on our street where the car itself was totaled because the water came and it got into the electronics, and that was the end of that. In fact, it was funny. People who had older cars who did not have the electronics actually did a lot better than the newer cars with the electronics because the salt water didn't get into the basic parts of the older cars, but anything basically since 1992, 1993 was basically out the window, it's gone. So, another question, comment, thoughts you might have? Feel free, you got 5 more minutes, that's it. You know. Oh, back left corner. Oh, you again. Yes, please.
So, talking about the labor market, something that's really pervaded the golf industry of late, and you talked about, obviously, traditional reports of low unemployment. I'd love to get a comment, if you could, on your thoughts long-term for the gap between 6 and 9 unemployment, in other words, labor participation, combined with some of the other factors.
Gentleman, unfortunately, asked a very difficult question about labor force participation rates. That, for some of you, is probably one of the most disappointing aspects of the last 2 years or so. So the labor force participation rate basically wants to know, of the people who are available to actually work, what percentage of them are participating in the labor force, working? For those of you that are somewhat familiar, since 1979, yes, 1979, the labor force participation rate for men has gone down steadily. May not surprise some of you who are in Pennsylvania or northern New England, upstate New York, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Minnesota, but the labor force participation rate for adult men has gone down steadily since 1979. Now, what saved us in the 1980s and 1990s, thank you ladies, was the rising labor force participation rate of women. Again, because a lot of the jobs shifted from heavy manufacturing to service sector. A lot more women got college education. They wanted to get their own job. Thank you, they wanted their own money. And that really helped us. Well, it helped us until 2011, when the labor force participation rate for women went down. So now you've got real problems, and that helps explain why, despite the fact we have more people, the labor force participation rates have declined. And as many of you suspect, since COVID, they have declined very sharply for men 55 and older. This is all public information, so again, you can talk to Taylor and say, Taylor, I'd like to see that graph. I can send you a couple of graphs on that. So as many of you can appreciate, and I see it where we are in Southwest Florida, a lot of people coming in, and the guy has retired, that was me, and my wife can work remotely, and that's her. And we know a number of couples that are like us, where the gentleman has said, okay, that's it for me, I'm done. You know, my wife and I agreed, you've done enough, we've got enough money, we don't have a mortgage, I'm out of here. But she needed something to grow gray hair with and tear her hair out, and so she's still in the job market dealing with a very large financial institution that shall go unmentioned. But yeah, so that's some of that migration that you saw in Southwest Florida was a lot of those couples moving down where the gentleman retired or did a consulting job, all right? Our best friend, fellows from Houston, he retired and does consulting on the side, and his wife works remotely, as Tiffany does. So yeah, one of the great challenges is you're not getting a lot of what you thought were the professionals back in the labor force despite the economic recovery in 2022. And so our labor force participation rates have not improved. Long run, what's really important about that is labor force participation rate is one of the fundamentals of economic growth. You have to have rising labor force participation rates if you want to sustain 3 to 4% economic growth in the United States. And we don't have that. So there becomes a real question about the federal budget and the federal debt. Because how in the world are we going to pay off all that federal debt if our economic growth is only 1 to 2%? And that is a real long-term challenge. The Congressional Budget Office has done a number of studies on that. And they're not very positive studies. So we have time for one more question, a question that perhaps will keep you in your seats a little bit longer and prevent you from having a longer break. So if there's someone who wants to be, upset the audience, please let us know. Oh, are you just stretching back there, sir? Was that you just stretching, or you wanted to raise a hand, ask a question? You were just stretching. Okay, hey, you folks have been great. Questions are always the best part of any presentation. Thank you.